Yeah, the call wild's always bringing me home. Call wild's always bringing me home. Call wild's always bringing me home.
Well, hello, wild ones. Welcome to another episode of the Find Your Wild podcast. I'm so excited today to have Harriet Goudard with me. Did I say that correct, Harriet?
Did, yeah.
Okay, perfect. And Harriet, it's really cool to have you here. You're also a systemic coach slash facilitator, and a lot of your work focuses on family constellations, and you work with horses. So I'm really excited to, and there's a couple of other intricate aspects to that you do more specifically that we'll get into in this episode. But thank you so much for being here. And how are you doing today?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. And yeah, doing great. We are swiftly going into autumn over here in England, so it's
Yeah.
interesting that it just sort of felt like it was flipping over that cusp sort of yesterday, actually. So it's interesting to talk to you now on that sort of descent into winter.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny because I would say the same. I'm in New York, so I guess similar sometimes temperate zones up here, but we kind of had very chilly days the last 2 days. So definitely are feeling autumn starting to breeze through, which is lovely. I mean, autumn's my favorite time of the year. So yeah, I'm excited.
And it's a beautiful time in terms of transitions, right?
Yeah.
Because, often I think about my work and I try and summarize it in various different ways, depending on who I seem to be speaking to as a particular audience at a particular time. And really, my work speaks to supporting people through those big transitions. So whether that is, loss and reintegration, and that can look obviously in myriad ways, or going out of corporate into entrepreneurship, or even just cranking up their entrepreneurship journey. It's always this big sort of death period, sort
Yeah.
of that kind of energetic. So that's really interesting as well. That is actually being mirrored in the outside world, even in this conversation.
Wow. Yeah, I really love that. To get started for people listening that don't know what you do already, maybe to explain a little bit of your work with the family constellations and kind of what that means.
So family constellations is a modality that was brought to the West by a gentleman called Bert Hellinger in the late 70s. And he lived for many years in South Africa, and I think all over Southern Africa. And he lived and studied with the Zulus while he was out there. And he understood this practice through these ancient tribal ways as a way to resolve conflicts within a community. So the communities in that context were looking like, age-old tribes still sharing the same land that they'd shared with their ancestors. And so really rooted examples of how that work can move really fast and be really powerful and help people to see eye to eye again, and the things that just come up on a daily basis. He then ended up as I think you call it a master, I'm not sure what you call it back then, but of a boarding school down in South Africa. And he was starting to apply these rules, orders, we call them, to his operation down there, and the way that he dealt with the community, which of course wasn't then tribal, or to some extent it wasn't tribal. It was young boys in these religious boarding schools. And so for an example with that, rather than looking at excluding children if they were to misbehave or play up or, really act out, he was actually treating the tribe, the community of children as a whole, so that if one of them needed to express himself in a different way or test the boundaries, all of them would hold accountability for that one child. Because of course, what I remember from school is that if somebody was acting out, we all knew. Not that we all said anything about it or did it with them or whatever, but we all knew. So treating them as a whole, so that then they become accountable for themselves as a whole, and that really helps to foster the sense of harmony within the community, you know, not in an overbearing sense, which it could perhaps translate to, but in a very gentle, loving sense that, you know, actually you're one.
Right.
So Family Constellations then came to the West. It was German, and so he brought it to Germany, and then it sort of echoed out of there. And really what it means is that we can represent the players within any system. So within that community or family system or the school system, we can actually use people or objects to represent the key players within that system. And in that process, we might do that, for example, in my office here, we set it up with 3 or 4 people, 3 or 4 cushions. And what you can actually do in that process is you can feel the energetic dynamics at play between those 2 representatives. So you can feel the energetic of the relationship between 2 or more individuals.
Yeah. Wow. It's incredible. So the first time I ever encountered Family Constellations was actually I was watching Goop on Netflix, that show, and she was highlighting, I think one of them was like the Wim Hof method, and then another episode was this Family Constellations, and I just remember I was like, what is this? And then further watching the episode and being like absolutely amazed. I was like, wow, that's really cool. And so like all the people were kind of like like in this situation they were standing outside, and there's like a decent amount of people for, you know, maybe like 10 or so. But you know, I think that it goes to this importance, right, of energy, and that must be like the utmost importance to you within this kind of work, right?
Yeah, exactly. So when then you feel the energetics at play in that relationship, and as a facilitator, you're able to feel what's going on in the field, we call it. The system itself is always seeking wholeness, so it's always seeking resolution or harmony. And so what we are then shown is the way that things need to move within that system in order to reinstill that sense of harmony within the system itself. So, for example, you know, as simple as maybe there's a mother and a daughter, and the daughter is very frustrated, very angry. Maybe there's some discord going on there. You know, I'm trying to relate it to a tribal example as well, because we can feel that this is probably an age-old story, right?
Right.
And
Yes.
and then she's looking at her mother and, oh, you know, there's so much wrong here. You know, what am I going to do about it? And actually, when we set it up in the constellation, perhaps that child, that daughter, just is looking to be seen. So perhaps the mother could turn, in this example, 180 degrees, or be invited to very gently and slowly, depending on, you know, what's going on for her, but just to turn slowly to look her daughter in the eyes, which, you know, immediately just gives the exhale that we're looking for. And you can feel how that would just settle the system just enough for her to be able to be that child again and actually receive from her mum.
Yeah, I feel like even just the fact that a mother and daughter would take the time to come in and want to work on their relationship is probably a big step, right? With your work, and how people need to be ready to receive like the information that's coming along through these sessions to be able to work towards what they need to change or accept in their lives.
Yeah, it's massive. You know, and I do have mother-daughter relationships who do come in together physically here, really in the real room, as well as couples as well. You can imagine that takes a lot of courage.
Yeah.
But we can do it with just one person. So we could do it just with that daughter, or
Right.
we could do it just with that mother. And we can set up the representation of the respective party with another person who might be somebody I call in to help me. So that might be on, you know, on the face of it, a stranger to the client who's coming in. We could set it up as an object. So we could set it up with an object on the table to represent the mother or daughter and see how she relates to that object. I would also be able to, in that moment, read a lot into the object that she chooses. So I'd say, hey, choose a random object from this bag of objects, for example. Playmobil work very well. And noticing what they choose, we can see whether that object has a face, whether it's looking upwards, downwards, or forwards, whether it is faceless, whether lots of nuances that we can actually already pick up a lot of information just in the object that they choose, because nothing's chosen by hazard. Everything has a deeper meaning, and we're working with this field that is really latent, it's really alive, and it's really us that have to tune into it rather than sort of ask it to turn on or ask it to do anything. It's really us calibrating to it. So and then I suppose worth mentioning now then that we can actually then take that out into nature, which is really beautiful, because then everything has a voice, including horses, which are the animal partners that I like to work with particularly.
Yeah, so I love that you brought that up. So I guess just another kind of question to, like, even just for myself in understanding how constellations really work and how you can interchange them with objects, animals, nature, or even other people. Is it always do the people representing, like, in the constellation, are they always like another person within the main person's family, or is it could they also just be representing like raw emotion, or do you work through, like, I guess, are they always representing family, but like maybe the emotion pops up more for that particular family member, if that makes sense, that question?
Yeah, so I think I understand in terms of whether we represent. So okay, I'll answer it as if I understand exactly, which is we can set up the person and look deeper on that relationship, and that person within the family system comes with habits, beliefs, their own emotions, their own traumas, their own mannerisms. So somebody we might bring in as a stranger to the client will 9 times out of 10 pick up on most, if not all of that, just through representing that in the field. And then on the other side of it, we can set up an emotion as an energetic, almost like an archetype, and see how that person interacts with that as well. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, you answered my question. That's great. Yeah, because I feel like it was hard for me to kind of pinpoint down exactly what I was trying to say, but at least you you got the gist of what I was asking. Which I find so fascinating about this. Like, even when I was when I was watching that Goop episode with the family constellations, because that's kind of like my reference point of where I first connected with this space. And it was deep ancestral lineage, so like went like great grandparents, and the people that were doing this really got they found out things in the moment, but then even after, when they went home and did like more research, they found a lot more things pop up and kind of almost validate what they were going through in this experience, which I found like really fascinating too. And would you say, like, do the people that volunteer or whoever is strangers to the person that is the focus of the session, do they need to be trained, or is it like totally intuitive when they come in to help you?
Well, I think that's the cool thing about this work, is that anyone can do it. My
Cool.
dad has come in, he's done it, my mum's done it. Skeptics are wonderful, because they're always surprised, and if they don't feel anything, then that's really good information too, because that might represent a freeze in the system, or somebody who's not able to get in touch with their feelings or their body. So absolutely, I love the fact that this is almost like open source, and
Yeah.
anyone can do it.
Wow, that's really incredible. So when you have people that come in and they are these volunteers, um like what is like the feedback that you get from them too after a session? Like I'm sure like maybe like your mom and dad have seen you do it, but then to come into a circle and to be able to help with an actual session, like I'm sure is just as powerful for the people volunteering as it is for the person that it's supposed to be like, directly helping.
Yeah, I love that, because what you're tapping into there is the fact that nobody's chosen by hazard. So even when people are just representatives for somebody else in their system, there's always something that resonates within the role that they've represented, either in terms of an emotion that they needed to run and process, cognitive information that needed to be said or understood more deeply that's relevant to them or their lives, or something about the player or the role that they play in terms of their own family system. So overall, it helps people cultivate a really deep empathy and a realization that we're not alone in going through this stuff. And there's a solidarity with that, which helps you to feel like you belong, because when we are either in conscious or unconscious reverberations of trauma, our own, and particularly systemic, we can feel overwhelmed by it and not realize that, firstly, it might not be ours to start with and we're echoing something much older, but also that that it's okay and it's totally normal, and it can actually be a good thing, an opportunity to feel in this body in this lifetime, and in the process of feeling that, we can actually get to something really quite beautiful on the other side as well.
Yeah, the thing that pops to my mind that I really love about this is the sense of community and, like you said, like belonging, and how we really need each other, right? To be able to reflect these truths back to each other, which I find like incredibly special. And I feel like, especially we're in the age where I see quotes all the time being like, I'm the cycle breaker of my family, or, I'm breaking ancestral curses. And I feel like your work very much aligns with those sentiments. And I love the fact that you bring horses into it. I personally feel like horses are just really just such powerful healing, creatures. And I would love to hear more about how, because obviously with humans, and if they are volunteering for a session, it might be a little bit easier because they're talking about how they feel. How does that work when you replace them with horses in this line of work?
So people can be easier in terms of being able to speak the information. So in terms of verbalizing sentences that come from the field, so there are sentences that come up that some people call healing sentences, which could be as simple as "I see you" in that earlier example. Horses obviously don't speak, with their mouths, and sometimes it can be easier with horses because it moves a lot quicker. So there's a latency with people as we filter through, oh, is this my own? Is this real? Is this true? Is this useful?
Right.
And all of these things, particularly the deeper we go into this work, the less we want to project, the more we want to own. And yet there also has to be a boldness with it to say the thing if it's difficult. Right. Which is the courage piece that comes in when we represent for other people, largely because they're we're often talking about big things that need naming. The horses will come in and say the thing. They will not have a filter. And so I feel that in that instance, it's for the facilitator to be able to catch it as it's said and to translate it. And whether that translation is through me echoing the sentence or the movement or did you see, it's probably more along the lines of lining them up so they can have that experience themselves. And more often than not, that comes down to a nuanced conversation with me and the horse, which is when the horse is saying, this is what's coming for them. And they'll say to me, and this is what's coming for you, as in me and my own personal stuff, at which point I'll say, okay, I'm going to park that.
I'll save that for later.
Just pop that in a bubble. Let's focus on the client. And then I know that, I'm out of that. And, this is the client. So do I need to be there to do it? I think it's setting up the structure. It's offering the space. It's obviously booking the time and the commitment for people to come. It's presenting the horses. But there's something about them being ready. There's something about people being ready. And, from your, you've been a horse owner. And so there are these things, if we're willing to hear, if we cultivate our ears to hear, that they do just drop in like a dynamite, don't they? So I think it's a mixture of that too.
Yeah, they're just incredible. I mean, and I feel like I've always said that like horses have had, like they are just known for having a sixth sense, like they can read your emotions. So it makes sense to me that they would be such a great facilitator of this work, right? Because they really feel things that are unseen. And it just, I don't know, like especially because I just lost my horse, so like talking about transitions and things like that. But just the amount of like wisdom that like just being in their presence gives is just incredible. So I can only imagine the even further depth when you're like tapping into like a specific kind of system that you have going on when you're setting up the constellation work. I'm very curious too about when you are doing these sessions and everything, what are some of like is it physical movements or is it purely energetic that you're picking up from the horses that you're able to read and pass that information along to your clients?
So with my horses or with a herd, more domesticated horses, it would be physical movements, both of the horse and the client. So I might either guide them within a constellation with other people and then the horse comes in through that space, or even behind an ancestor of theirs to represent the greater thread of their lineage, standing behind that ancestor, for example. A horse can come in as a boundary, so they might move in between two people. An impermeable boundary, or something needs to change or shift or drop or be said before that horse will then move, and that's clarified. And yes, energetic. Obviously, there's quite a bit of yawning that goes on. Horses can lie down within this context as well, because when we see identification with, for example, war victims, and there's a big death field within somebody's family system, generally people will want to lie down. There's an energy that wants to drop down to the ground, and horses can feel that too, and they can want to go down to the ground as well.
Wow. Amazing. That's really, it's just so cool to be able to, it makes me want to do it one day eventually too, to see what pops up, because it's just, it's amazing, right? With energy and how, like, I just feel like there's something like, even if you're a skeptic, right? Like energy doesn't lie. That's like the biggest thing I feel like that comes to me is just that energy is so potent and powerful, and that it literally travels through your lineage, your line, your family line down to you. And what kind of pops up, or is it still there hidden, and what we're passing on, because even like when we are, and this will lead me to maybe some of our next questions, but even when we're pregnant, right, especially for us women, and like I think I saw something online that there's a point in time where your grandmother was also carrying you, because when you have a female and your grandma is carrying your mom and all the eggs that she'll ever have, so she was in turn is carrying her lineage when you're, you know, pregnant with a daughter. So there's this, you know, even when we're just talking in general about like, you know, family lines and everything like that, it's so connected, and I think much more so than people realize. And to be able to sit and recognize and to be able to get to a point where you're like, okay, I'm going to recognize what's trying to come through, because the more you sit with something, at least that, like from personal experience, I think that, you know, it's the scary part of trying to actually confront it that gets us, that we don't actually want to confront these hard truths. But like the moment we do and we sit with it for a little bit, I think it's much easier to live life after that. It's very healing, and I'm sure that you see this firsthand. But I know that a big part of your process is dealing with women and loss and abortion and things like that. So how does that play into when you talk about you know, facilitating these kind of spaces?
Mm. So I just love the way that you're naturally tapping into that energetic that runs through the ancestral lines, because that, for me, is really the premise of the work, is to unkink that hose as much as is
Yeah.
possible, that runs, that plugs us in really to our family tree and trees on both sides, and imagining those branches going all the way back to that original word or that original pulse of creation. So I see my role really as resourcing people through that energetic pulse, by unkinking the hose, so that people in the present moment can be living more deeply, more grounded, have fuller expressions of who they are, which include being able to live in community with more harmony, right? So then if we look at that on the inverse of that, in order to unkink that hose, we're looking at where's it stuck? Where are the kinks? And what we know from this work is that when there's a significant trauma within the system, it creates that kink. And not only a kink, but it can actually create a void, which then subsequent generations, out of loyalty to the system, try to fill, through either mirroring that trauma that happened further up the line or resisting it. You know, there can be the reactive and the repressive approach or response to these things. And so we go back down through the line, starting with the personal generally, and then going into the transpersonal, so into the ancestral, and see what has happened in terms of losses. Because more often than not, even if it is personal and we have experienced losses ourselves, and particularly I work with a lot of women who've had abortions and or miscarriages, more often than not that is resonant of something earlier on in the system too. So integration of loss has been a real feature in terms of my work and my own personal journey, which is probably why it's a big part of my own work. And I really see how this journey of loss integration equates to a deeper sense of personal power in our current lived experience. So we can call it loss, we can call it power loss. You know, there's a big shamanic body of work on power loss as well, and soul loss. And I think that really this work sort of combines all of those things, actually, because what we're doing is going back and unkinking that hose.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I was trying to get the background of like how family constellations work, but I would love to just get a little bit more of a background about how you personally were drawn into this work and how you came to do it yourself.
Okay. So this was, I was thinking, you know, there's a time I can remember being at my mum and dad's house in the bathroom upstairs, which interestingly had a lot of mirrors in it. And everyone else was downstairs, and I remember having a set of thin silver bracelets at the time. So yeah, my young teenage years, and semi-intentionally throwing them onto the carpet on the floor and just noticing how they fell. And all of the bracelets were together. I think there was 8 together, and one ended up on the periphery. And I remember looking at that and thinking, and that's me on the periphery. That's the difference. That's the majority, and that's me on the periphery. And so that was the earliest example of a constellation I think that I've ever really sort of at least 70% consciously been involved in. And, you know, perhaps that was a choice point for me too, in terms of what that led into. Because in my earlier years, I was very studious, and I went to a strict school, and I followed all of the norms and did all the things. And then in puberty, really, I started to explore the meta realm and started working with plant medicines and things at quite an early age. So really, I was already working in something much broader, much bigger, something much more multidimensional, even back then, but I can't say I really understood it. So it came back together when I married my husband, who is now the father of our 2 children, and we had our first son, and I had lost a lot of confidence in terms of moving to France and having to learn French, and I felt a bit like a duck out of water. And at that point, really, things sped up very fast for me. So that experience of feeling like the odd one out at that point started to really feel like this might actually be a point of personal power, in terms of it might be time to really fully integrate another layer of that, to come home to myself to a greater extent. And so we were living in France, and I had always had horses as a young woman and as a child. And latterly, when we'd been traveling and then we met and went to France, I didn't have a horse. And so I got involved with a local stable yard and started to do some show jumping on an old schoolmaster, and then eventually bought my own horse again. And as we were living in Burgundy, as we left the city of Lyon and moved up to Burgundy, I started riding him in with the premise of doing dressage again. And actually, he didn't want to do that. So he took me out into the forest, and we did trail rides, and ended up without the saddle, ended up trading the bridle for a head collar, and just ended up getting really free and sort of allowing that wild, rather than having to put it to one side or do it in a way that was shameful or harmful, or in a way rejecting of some aspect of myself. It was really a more indulgent, embodied version of that same flavor that I had been exploring since, you know, my early teens, but making it accessible for myself and really going much deeper with that. And in that process, my horse started to open up a whole new world to me, because what I noticed was that whatever I was going through personally, you know, in having a young child and then children, and in my marriage and being in this foreign country, whatever I was going through, I could set an intention, and we would go out to the ride, and my horse would take me into these experiences, to these herbs, to these portals between these 2 really big trees, or just flick an ear up so that I would look to this kestrel that was circling above, just to notice the breeze moving across my face as I was dropping more deeply into the process of processing whatever it was that I had gone into the ride with. And so I started to become conscious of that invitation. So every time he invited me out and we'd ride together, there was an arc of a journey, like a dream journey, that we would take together. And I would come back with realizations, and I would journal and talk to my husband about it, and he would look at me thinking, what was going on? And just starting to really embed it as part of who I was. And I found off the back of that, I'd already done Reiki and had healing hands and things from an early age anyway. So that was all quite natural to me. But this shamanic piece, I ended up finding a shamanic teacher based in Colorado, and she said to me, "Oh, you're doing it already, but we probably just need to tidy it up so that it's actually really well contained." So she helped me to do that and taught me the core shamanic practices, so that I could have a clear way in and, of course, a clear way out. Which, knowing now from the work that I offer clients, containment in terms of that clear intention, timing, all of the things helps you to know why you're doing it, helps you to integrate it and embody it rather than leave it in the realm of fantasy, which can perpetuate also and then start to question ourselves. So really, she helped me integrate it on another level. And then from there, the horses actually told me about horse constellations. And so I looked into horse constellations because there was this, this process going on for me where the landscape was talking. I was feeling the energetic coming back into my body of whatever it was that I was receiving in terms of information from the field, from these active representatives, these birds and trees and plants, and of course the horses. And I looked up this English lady actually who is in California, called Sarah Fancy, and she was the founder of Horse Constellations. So she had put family constellations with horses and coined the term horse constellations. And so I went out to study with her, and just after my grandmother died actually, and really deeply went into that, at which point she said to me, haven't you really deeply studied family constellations? And I said, well, no. She said, okay, well, we need to get you on that as well. So then from there I went into the deep study of that as well. But what I would say is that if it hadn't been the horses that had taken me into that route, and somebody had said to me, you need to do family constellations straight off the bat, I would have said no way, because I was not ready to look at all of the stuff, particularly even with regards to my relationship with my parents. The horses actually titrated my nervous system to a place that I could actually accept that. So
Wow.
That was almost a constellation of itself, just getting into that in the first place. So that was really how I got into it.
Hi, Wild Ones. I hope you're enjoying this episode of the Find Your Wild podcast. This episode is sponsored by my clothing brand, FemmeSauvage, and you can find a discount code and link in the description. So check it out. We have a lot of amazing designs, and $5 of the proceeds goes to different charities. So please feel free to check it out and enjoy the rest of the episode. Thanks so much. Wow. That's a beautiful, incredible story. So thank you so much for sharing that with me. And it's amazing, right? How horses pull you, and they know deep within yourself, and it's almost like they have one foot in another realm and one foot here, and are really able to like see the threads of life, right? And it's really cool to be able to see that work. And it also kind of brings to mind how it's funny how they wanted to make sure that, you kind of had your own constellation and knew, how to heal yourself and be to a place where you were able to give and be able to help others in that space. Just so wonderful.
And, then from that place of serving the I, and this is now the journey I take clients on, in many different contexts, but in that solidification of the I, and I don't see the I as a bad thing. I see it as an essential. From there, when we can unkink that hose so that we have that really deep sense of I, and for, I believe women like us, certainly in my journey, it's been more about claiming my desires and allowing that and indulging that a bit more rather than, the contrary. We're able to show up more fully and more powerfully, more presently to deal with the things that obviously inevitably life throws at us, and see others in that place too, to hold them at that higher octave too, so that, we all have stuff going on. We all have traumas that are flared up depending on what life kicks up. And we're from that place of personal power and presence, we're able to see and hold each other more readily in that natural flow of life. So what that is then is community. We're able to be a member of true community as we're able to see ourselves fully, show up fully into the herd, and then see each other more fully. So then it really does mirror the herd of the horses. This perfect community is when we come together in the fullness of that personal power, each one of us, and then the community is actually fostering that individual spirit rather than, controlling it, dominating it, telling it what to do or where it fits, which is that old school. For example, you can think about it in a business. That's the old school model of it. And I believe that that's all breaking down now as more of us understand this journey arc from the I to the many. And that's also why I love horses as partners for this journey, because they actually help us to ride this whole wave all the way into this new sense of community.
Yeah. Even with what you said, right? Because horses are herd animals. So to be able to showcase that, like you said, that sense of community, and to be an example for us of how we can do that well together. And, to me, it seems like it all really goes hand in hand. And like, there really is so many depths to this, right? Like with the horses being a part of a herd and representing what a community is. And then as well as like trying to unkink the hoses, right? Because when we go through traumas and we have these big negative impacts in our lives, whether that be our own or ancestral traumas, how much that actually pushes us away from community, because it breaks trust in other people, what these traumas bring sometimes. And the fact that depending on, I guess, like what the trauma is how, uncomfortable we are to sit in that space with the trauma, right? Like, and to be able to try to come to a safe place to be able to see and recognize it. Like, right, even with your own story, to be able to, that you said, to be able to get to a place that you were able to have your nervous system calm, to be able to look at your relationship with your parents. And I mean, even through me personally, like not doing specifically your work, but just I've been through, many years of therapy, and, just focusing a lot more on deep diving into like myself and shadow work and all of that stuff. And I really recognized how much that's helped me to bring my nervous system down and to be able to be in a more present place, especially that's so important for, like just being a mom and a wife, and to be able to be in this place. And even doing this podcast, and then having my my clothing brand and my art, like being able to express myself, I think that being able to have that healing work has really pushed forward this creative aspect of my life. And I think that it's such a good example for us to give people listening, is like the more you focus and go inward, you can really push yourself more outward. You'll have more energy, like you'll be more balanced. And I love that aspect too, of like each person is like so unique. And obviously like there's good and bad things that come with your ancestral line, but there's, I think there's a lot of power in that, and then who you are as a person to be able to give not only to your future family line, but to hopefully heal old wounds and to see like what you're meant to do here in general, with the time that you have.
Yeah, exactly. And then we are creative stepping forwards. And, that is actually leadership, because when we are allowing and embodying our creativity in moment to moment, through many means, and I love the fact that you are an artist, because I used to be, and I need to do more of that. But, creativity can come in many ways, and even moving things, objects around a house, for example, in Constellation, for example. We can move energy in that way and be creative. And, what underpins all of it, all forms of creation, is that when we're in it and allowing it to come through us, we are leaders, because we're leading ourselves in the way that we need to, in order to have the fullness of that expression. And naturally, that turns on, other lights within other people about the possibility of living in that way. So we are both self-leaders, but also leaders of community when we demonstrate that through the possibility of creation. And I think there's nothing more beautiful and exhilarating than actually seeing that in somebody who's in the fullness of their expression, unapologetic.
Yeah, I love it. I can't think of anybody specific off the top of my head right now, but I think that I've followed many people, and women specifically, that have lived that life that have inspired me to do it for myself, and it's a really great chain effect, right? It's kind of like the opposite of what you focus on, I guess, or not maybe the opposite, but like I think a lot of that is trauma based, right? And trying to heal during your work, and I'm sure you see good things that pop up during that as well. But it's like a good chain of effect. Like when we're living, there's it's kind of funny because my dad would always say to me growing up, like, do as I say, not as I do. So I've kind of made it my life's effort to always be like, well, do as I do. Like kind of the opposite of that. Sorry, Dad, but and I think that there's nothing more powerful than that, right? Because like when you're so true to yourself and then showcasing that and being like, that's what's inspiring to other people, to be able to be like, there's nothing wrong with being your true self. And like, I think we're very lucky to live in a time too right now that we can explore it. And I think with the help of the internet, people can really focus on kind of like what they're really good at and what they're meant for, which I think is like such a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah, exactly. And it brought me back to thinking about the herd, because when there's, and this is how I see it in terms of the constellation piece, when there's an impulse that comes through from the field, which is of course the unseen, which is the feminine, it moves a horse, right? Suddenly we can see a horse tapping into something in the field, quite unseen, and they can zip off across the field, the pasture, tail in the air, snorting, and they've moved it. They've moved the energy into creation. So they've created that movement into form, into the masculine. They've moved it. So that is that process of creation into expression. And of course, with horses, we've got this majesty, because they translate that so seamlessly, so unapologetically, and without hetatation. So that pulse from the unseen feminine to that masculine expression is almost without a second thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then there's a majesty that comes with that is way beyond force, and it is expressive of that pure pulse of life, I believe, and we get closer and closer to that through their invitation when we work with them.
Yeah, I really love that, and I love the way that you expressed that just now too, like the the way that, right, like the feminine is kind of like the unseen, and then the masculine, and how they really are so seamless with doing that, right? And I love that you know, you can create things, right, like what you said with just moving things around the house. Like creativity is like, it's even creative with being creative, you know.
Yeah.
And like what you can do with that creativity. But like us as humans, like even I think maybe just like sentient beings, like we're made to be creative, right? Like, you know, animals can have creativity in different ways that are, you know, in their form. But I guess this kind of leads me to a different subject, but I think it's really important, and I would love to talk to you a little bit more about it while I have you here, is, you know, the work that you do with women and miscarriages and abortion, because I have talked about this a little bit on some previous podcasts, but not too in depth. But I think it's just kind of like, and especially talking about the feminine, the unseen, is that there is a really big, you know, space where, you know, of course we're excited when we're talking about getting pregnant, but I think that there's like this big elephant in the room in regards to like how many people actually lose children, or, you know, whether through miscarriage or have to have, you know, an abortion, and how that kind of plays into your work and what you do.
Yeah. So having experienced losses of my own, I could see quite early on when our son was born, after my losses, probably a decade prior, he was always very frustrated, very needy, very loud, a difficult baby, let's say, you know, they would have labeled him, some did. And, you know, when I constellated that, he had deep fury that was keeping him in a state of defense. He needed me, but he couldn't access me. He couldn't get satiation from life without his connection to me, and yet he couldn't see me, he couldn't find me. So, you know, that would translate as a small baby into a child that always wanted to be on my breast, always feeding, all night long, always awake, very nervous that I wasn't going to be there. And then as he grew up, it always felt that we were sort of missing each other, not quite able to connect and go really deep with an ease that I have found with our daughter, you know, and different in other ways. But for him, when I constellated that the first time, it was obvious that that something was in the way. And this is what I find a lot in constellations with women, on the face of it, around many different issues. It can be relational issues between partners, husband and wives. It can be between siblings, finances. You know, this topic can come up too within that exploration, and certainly in business. And that is because the system doesn't forget. You know, we do our best to overcome and heal and grieve to the most part that we can, or, you know, that is permitted, depending on the external circumstances and our internal capacity for those things. But essentially, it is often the case that these children are out of order within our family system, so out of place. And what that means is that when we're talking about that hose again coming through our lineages into us, we pass that life force, of course, into our children. And if there is an order out of place within the siblings, our children, what happens is that the eldest might not be in the right place. So he or she is not able to receive the fullness of that life force. And the fullness of that life force, to give you an example, in receiving that, going back to earlier, just as simply as I see you, in the correct place. So as the eldest child, or actually, you're not the eldest child, you're the third child in my case, the third and fourth children. And so what we're doing is going back to those losses, those experiences, and we're saying, you do have a place in this family system. You will always have a place. They've always been there, so they always have had a place, but it's not been acknowledged, seen, and the correct place, the correct order. So as a result, they keep popping up in the middle of other inquiries, seemingly unrelated, because they're kind of putting their hand up and saying, integrate me now. This is, I'm here. I need looking at. And as I mentioned briefly earlier, through this work, if we don't look at a trauma in terms of integrating it within our experience, as has been the case in many of the ancestral layers behind us, subsequent generations can and do get entangled with those things. So if children are excluded from a family system, say there was an abortion a generation ago, that was unable to talk about within the family, and so it was hidden and shamed, and that child therefore was excluded from the family system, so a secret, that actually carries great weight in future generations. So it can have a big pull on future generations. And so as much as is possible in present time, when women come to me and we set up anything, I will always ask the questions around whether they've had any losses of their own, because 9 times out of 10 that they are key parts of a system that just wants wholeness, just wants to come back to being seen and honored and fully grieved, because there still are often seams of grief within that too.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I'm so sorry for your losses that you went through. And it's so important. I mean, unfortunately, I went through my own loss, and it was actually right before I had my son, and I was pretty decently far along, and it just, what you're saying really resonates with me as well, because I think that there's a big part of it that's, it's interesting, and I always say women don't talk about it enough, about loss, and if you bring it up with someone, if you're having a one-on-one conversation, I've had many people tell me that they've had a loss that I would have had no idea, and it's just so not talked about. And I think back to myself as well, and stating, obviously it's not talked about, but it's something that I didn't even want to talk about or bring up, right? Not necessarily that I wanted to hide it or anything like that, I wasn't ashamed of it, but that it was just so difficult for me to talk about. And it's just this really deep pain, deep wound that we have. And I think especially that these situations can be so complicated as well. My situation was very complicated, and I just remember getting a call back from the doctor and telling me that my baby probably had Down syndrome. So we went, and this was during COVID, so they had to do a pin, I guess take a needle and put it in my stomach, and my husband couldn't come in with me, so I was doing it by myself. They messed up, so they had to do it again, the needle and everything like that, and just waiting for the test results. But the biggest thing that pops up from that experience was how much I really wanted that child. Every time that they kept bringing it up to me, I was just but I really, really want this child. And I think, towards the end, unfortunately, our baby had, it had a pulse, but the heart had a huge hole, which I had actually heart surgery twice when I was a child as well, but it was healable. Obviously, I'm here, and there was no way to be able to fix that. So I had to choose to get an abortion, but it wasn't at all what I wanted. And I think that what people don't realize is that, there's just this like ginormous gray area in regards to loss and to abortion. And I wouldn't have ever wanted to choose that, but I kind of had no choice. It was like the baby would have, like, I would have eventually had to, either, like, I probably would have miscarried or something else. So it was like, then just having to start again. But, such a deep loss. And then I got pregnant very quickly after like a couple months, like the appropriate amount of time. And we weren't even trying, but it just happened, But it's interesting because you're talking about your son, and I feel like my son kind of has similar-ish things. He's very much attached to me all the time, but he also is a little delayed in speech, and he definitely has like some pretty strong temper tantrums too. Obviously that goes with having a 3.5-year-old, but it's interesting to think now of what you said and to think about what possibly is aligned in what, like, I'm subconsciously maybe passing along through the family line, even though I'm so conscious with trying to work through all that stuff. We're not perfect, right? So, being able to, I guess, try to, I don't even know what else I was going to say in regards to that, but just that I think this is just such a space for women that it's so complicated that I think that's really beautiful, that it's almost like sometimes we don't even know what we're missing in that situation, which is why I think that the constellation work is so beautiful. It shows us what we don't even realize that we need.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, thank you for sharing that that experience with me, because yeah, it's devastating. I think however it presents, it's as creative beings that we've been talking about deeply in connection with that creative pulse, cutting that short in any way can be, devastating. And what I also wanted to say was that we can only do what we can do. I know that when I started this work, I had this really long to-do list of all the things I needed to at least start working on, because I knew that there would be a trauma wrapped up in it somehow, and I would be passing that on or acting as a result of that in my interactions with our children. And at some point, I think it's about letting that go and saying that, I will endeavor to do what I can do, and the rest, I have to trust is going to the right place. Because what we're talking about then is the intersection between, our karma and what is the karma of our children as well. And inevitably they will have ancestral stuff of their own to work through. And to some extent, perhaps that's the reason why we're here too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, especially us as moms, right? Like, there's just such a strict, like, judgment on moms on like, oh, you should do this or you should do this. And then I think especially more specifically, like conscious moms like us, like, really, really trying to do the deep work and trying to do that. But then there's also, at least for me, that there's like this perfectionism of like, I don't want to pass anything on to my son or anything like that. Like, how can I fully heal? And then I think that puts on even more pressure and doesn't help either. So I think that you made a very valid and good point that we can only do, what we can do, and just hope for the best, that, they're also meant to, that they'll handle things differently or better in ways that we wouldn't be able to either.
And I always say that they are, they're perfectly equipped for whatever they'll have to face as well, in terms of times and epochs, in a way that I see that we are, touch wood, compared to just my grandmother, 2 generations prior, who I know, if she'd have been around for COVID, would have found that whole period very, very difficult, for various reasons, but, also due to her war experiences. So I trust that they are equipped, our children, and yes, trusting that we'll do what we can, on that path, moment to moment, in integrity, and trusting that they'll be left with exactly the right friction for their fire too, because this stuff is deep and is difficult, and human suffering is obviously painful, and it is the catalyst for our own growth too. So really finding the gift in the struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess like as we're like nearing towards the end, like, with your work and like talking about going through all of these lineages and, these traumas and how we can work through them in our own lives, like what are the type of things that you see in like your clients once they go through this process? Like what's like the light at the end of the tunnel per se for them once they do this work?
Yeah, absolutely. So my clients generally have got a similar desire, and that is for community. So the arc of the journey I described earlier, generally their ideal is to either have a physical space, land, to set up a community, or to join a community, or to adapt in a community that they're already in. And so generally that looks like either starting afresh in terms of their business so that it is founded and based within that community structure that they're creating. And we strategize that together depending on, what is exactly right for their nervous system. Or it's a morph. It's the morphogenesis of where they already are. So generally there's a flavor of community, so people and relating with people differently, and having the courage to face that conflict, because it does arise, because we are human and it is life. So to have that tenacity, and to feel more grounded in their decisions and more outspoken in their creativity. So you can see then in that journey that we describe, it would come from the inside out. So they're not feeling that they have to supplicate themselves to these external systems, and they can actually trust the gnosis that comes within, the drive, the ideals and the longings to maybe farm the land, tend the hens, or tend their business. And maybe and some people do, they have high desires in terms of financial income from that aligned place, that activating leadership where they go out and help other women do similar things.
Yeah, it's really amazing, and it's incredible, and I hope that every person that has gone through the journey, whether with you or just in another space, I can, and it makes me so curious to maybe like one day do it for myself as well. It's just really powerful to be able to, and what I think is actually very cool from having talked with you is that it is such a unique space that it's like, I think sometimes like we think, oh, family constellations, but it is also like you could do it within business, you could do it within friends, or it's or with schoolmates, right? Like it's and how much like, and I don't think I realized before, but it makes a lot of sense how much it's really focused on community and being able to blend that. But it comes from a place of trying to be confident within oneself and to be able to heal those things and be like, okay, and accept that, okay, I see that is something that that person is struggling with, but I'm not going to take that on for myself. Like I definitely have, because I'm very empathic, and I feel like sometimes if somebody says something to me, or I'll immediately take that on as like myself, but I think that really is such a powerful thing to be able to help people see that through that, and give them their own confidence to stand, in their life in the present, and to be able to fulfill what they're meant to do here. It's just absolutely fascinating, and I think it's obviously very deep work, but for the people that are willing to open themselves up to that, I think there's like the most abundant healing that you could probably feel while doing this.
Well, yes, it's been the most abundant healing that I've ever personally experienced. Yeah. And it is so integrative of what's happening on a day-to-day basis. So it's not like we have to go and do something or go and, yes, it's helpful to set time aside to go and constellate and go and do things, but, you know, just bringing it back to something as simple as putting that intention out for what we need clarity on, and then, you know, going on our daily lives and just noticing what shows up in this constellation called life, because it is so alive and accessible to all of us. And knowing that and experiencing it, and then having that reaffirmed through the practice of it, you know, even before we go very deep with this, we're entering into this sisterhood, and I call it sisterhood, although it does include men, of course, but it's the rebirth of that understanding of the feminine and what it really means and what it really feels like, because it's the work through the body and bringing that back through into this realm. And so to me, that feels like a sisterhood. That feels like people like us standing side by side and saying, this is, you know, life. This is the reality of life that's under here.
Yeah, all the good and the traumas and everything like that, like you said before, it's right, it's kind of like what pushes us forward, but it's what's needed for our growth. At the same time, though, it asks us to sit with it, so it's very complex. And I think that what you're doing gives, you know, people the space to be able to sit with that complexity, to be able to heal and move on, not only for themselves, but hopefully for their, you know, lineage going forward, whether that be in their family lineage or whatever other community they're looking to, you know, focus and integrate with. So I just wanted to thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me and, you know, sharing what you do with everybody listening. And I think it's really beautiful and important. And I guess just like for people that want to connect with you or maybe want to do something like this, if you can maybe lead them, you know, into how they connect with you or what you do.
Thank you. So you can find me at harrietgoudard.com. And all of my offerings are on there. I offer a small number of private mentorship spaces ongoing throughout the year. And then I've got a various suite of products depending on what time of the year it is. And because I tune into the energetic of what's going on and what really wants to be spoken to. So at the moment, I've got a container around loss, specifically for those having experienced the miscarriages and abortions that we were talking to earlier. And that's called the Lost Boys and Girls. And then beyond that, all of my work has a flavor of helping women through these things anyway. So from one-to-one to group containers, it's all there on the website.
Lovely. I'll make sure to link it also so people can easily access that. But thank you so much, Harriet. It was really nice to chat and connect with you. And thank you for making the time to come on here. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope people listening also really got some valuable insights from our chat.
Thank you so much for having me, and really fun, good, great conversation. I can feel loads of energy has moved. So I hope you feel the same.
Absolutely. I really do. I feel very, very good. So thank you so much. And thank you so much, Wild Ones, for listening. I really appreciate it. And we'll catch you on the next one. Bye.
Flowing to the sea, I feel the energy of life force flowing all through